Hello and welcome to Module 16, the last module in this semester. Aren't you happy? Remember a few modules ago, I told you they were building that shed in the backyard. It didn't look like it was doing very good. Well, look, they completed it. Looks pretty nice, doesn't it? Huh? Yeah. I'll get into it. It looks good. So let's get this ball rolling. And all these things I gotta look down at. Hazard communication training. That's what we're doing. That's what we're finishing up here. All right. Section 6, other ways to communicate hazards. Okay. There are other ways. We talked about the safety data sheet. That's probably the best way. But Hazardous Material Information System, HMIS, National Fire Protection Association, NFPA 704 label, which is the fire diamond, they call it sometimes, and Department of Transportation placards, which we discussed a little bit too. Color code HMIS ranks hazards and recommends PPE, health, flammability, reactivity. We covered this a bit too, and they do kind of the similar things, which we're going to hit next, NFPA 704. Both of them are pretty common. Maybe NFPA 704 probably been around a little bit longer, I think, and it's very widely used. I know the fire departments like to put a big one of these up on the outside of a building. So when they pull up to the building, they can look at that and they say, okay, it's got this inside. So the fire hazard, not too bad. One, health hazard, it's got some hazardous stuff in there. Reactivity, whoa, we'll get very careful here. They got some stuff that shock and heat may detonate. So, and radioactivity here in this building. So we better be real careful. So the greatest hazard, of course, is the highest number of the specific hazards down there are acid, alkaline, corrosive, oxidizer, radioactive, and then a W with a line through it means use no water. So they're pretty similar. NFPA 704, probably a more widely used. Department of Transportation requires placards on vehicles carrying hazardous chemicals. They have 9 different classes. You can see that, a special one. And those placards, you'll see these on tankers and stuff like that to give you an idea of what the hazards in there. Why? Because if everything just goes hunky-dory and there's no problem, the flashers, you don't need them. But that's not always happens. Trucks wreck and the hazardous material gets spilled, and that's what you need to know. That, and again, that the responders need to know what it is. One of the most important things is know what you got. So controlling hazards. And again, we covered the DOT in the previous course and previous this semester. Section 7, controlling hazards. Hey, here you go. Ever heard of this before? Hierarchy of controls can protect you from hazardous chemical. No, it can't. It doesn't do anything. It just gives you a guideline. You have to do it. You have to decide what to do. You have to pick, can eliminate it, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, PPE. Down the line, the most effective to least effective. You should know this by heart. I've said it enough times, that's for sure. But this is really a basic fundamental of controls. That's what it's called. That's why it's called the hierarchy of controls. How about that? Eliminate or substitute chemicals you currently use with less harmful ones. We had a company in California, they came around every, I want to say, month, and we had a parts wash stand there, and they would give us new stuff and take off the old stuff, that we used our parts wash with. And I don't know, but they changed it one year and used a less hazardous chemical to wash or at least parts with. And thought it was a good idea. Made it safer for everybody. So if you're working, do you know any chemicals you can eliminate or replace in your work, or maybe even your home? Job Corps uses a soy-based foam insulation that's safer than asbestos, or not a bad idea. Just because it's green doesn't mean it's safe. Hardy plank has 10%, 50% silica. Weatherboard 45 to 55% silica. But just because somebody says something is green, that's kind of like somebody saying it's OSHA approved. There's no such thing as OSHA approved, and green is just a word. There are wet method engineering controls to reduce dust exposure on construction jobs. Dust is a serious exposure. And that guy's wearing I can't tell if you put your glasses, but it's wet, so that the dust is being controlled by engineering controls. Engineering controls are always good. Vacuum controls are effective for construction dust exposures. Again, they're engineering controls. You can see on the right, without vacuum, all the stuff that's in the air, with vacuum that's in the air, it's in the vacuum instead of in the air, and therefore in his lungs. Administrative controls can also reduce chemical exposures. Training and information, number one, always training is always number one in administrative controls. Signage, signs up just to let people know that there is a hazard there. Maintenance of equipment to prevent leaks and releases. Standard operating procedures, written procedures, so everybody knows what to do. Worker rotation. You have a job that's either more hazardous or strenuous or hot or cold. You rotate your workers through it. That's administrative control, so they're not exposed as much. Scheduling tasks when chemical use is low. So, chemical use might be in one area, they're doing something, but in the second shift, they're not. So that's the time you want to go and sit maybe there and clean up in the area or something like that. Yeah. Personal protective equipment is at the bottom of the hierarchy tools. Why? Well, it's not always the most effective, and it requires an action on the part of the employee to take care of, and doff their PPE. But the biggest hassle with PPE is getting people to wear it. And that's the nice thing about engineering controls. They're always there usually. Guards are always on that piece of equipment. And the employee doesn't have to do anything. It's there. Administrative controls, that's needs some effort there, but usually that's on the part of management, training, that type of thing. They're making you get the training. You have to, of course, follow your training, but PPE requires a lot on the part of the employee, and a lot of times they just don't want to do it for some reason. Don't ask me why. You don't think the hazard is dangerous enough for them to take the time to put on PPE. I don't ever figure out why they do that, but they do. Training on personal protective equipment is a requirement under HAZCOM. Now it's a requirement under a lot of OSHA things, but you got to train people on PPEs. You can't say, here, have these. Even if it's something as simple as hearing protection, you got to train them how to put it in. You got to tell them where they have to use it. You have to tell them how to clean it. So NIOSH-approved respirators can protect your lungs from chemical exposure. Yeah. Employers must have a written respiratory protection program that includes medical clearance, fit testing, training, and proper selection. So respirators, you just can't have a respirator. Say, hey, here's your respirator, dude, have at it. Nope, you got to have a fit. There's different sizes of respirators. So you got one that has to fit them. You have to test to fit them. You have to give them medical clearances and training. There's a lot that goes into respirator selection. Whenever you use PE, be sure to use PE has been selected for a given hazard and it fits correctly. Most PPE has to fit. Use PPE only if you've been trained. Got to be trained to do it. Always inspect the PPE before you use it. Usually that's just a visual. That's got to be something. With face mask, it's a little more than that. Never use damaged PPE. If it's damaged, turn it back in and get some new ones. And only use PPE as a last resort. And a lot of times that's the only thing you can do. A lot of times, like hearing protection, most of the time, you can't cut down 100% of the noise, but you can use engineering controls to cut down a lot of noise. I've done it before, and it works sometimes. Are there any health and safety issues from wearing PPE? Yeah, heat stress is one of them. If you're out in the hot and you got to put an extra layer of clothing on and there's no air coming through it at all, it'll be a big problem. Limits your movement. You're not as agile, not able to move as well. Sometimes they limit the vision, especially anything that you put on your face and around your eyes is going to limit vision somewhat. Limit hearing. If you have anything over your head, you can't hear as well, so it makes communication more difficult. Claustrophobia. Some people just can't do it. We had some training over at OK Foods when there was a guy who was one of the first ones to put on a level A suit in his training, and he couldn't do it, put it on, took it off. Well, after he stuck around for the rest of the thing and the other guys all did it, then he did it. He realized if anybody else, everybody else could do, he did it. So he ended up being fine. But his initial thing, and that would be my initial thing too. I'm a little claustrophobic. I don't I want to be in a level A suit ever. And I don't have a problem on airplanes. Flying is not a problem with me. What I hate is when the airplane lands and everybody gets in the aisle and I'm in the back and I can't get out. That bothers me until everybody gets out of the plane. That's the worst part of flying for me because of the claustrophobia that I have. Even though I'm not claustrophobic per se on the plane, but just when that aisle's open, I'm good. But when that aisle's stuffed, I'm not. I mean, I handle it, but I don't like it. Section 8, emergencies and first aid. Learn about first aid arrangements on your job site and read labels and safety data sheets before using chemicals. Before using the chemicals. Do you hear me? Before using the chemicals. What happens if you encounter a spill or a leak? Remember, HazCom training is not emergency response training. Inform your supervisor, inform the coworkers, leave the area. If you know what it is, that would help if you involve them. Oh, I spilled this over here. I spilled acetone over here, and let people know. But follow our employer spill response program. If you know what that is or have one, they have one. You must be trained to respond to fire of any size. Learn about the policy on fighting fires at your site. If your employer requires you to use fire extinguishers, you need to be trained on fire extinguishers and their use and what kind of fires they use. There's a lot to them. Using the wrong fire extinguisher can make it worse. If you've been exposed to a chemical, take these actions. Let your supervisor and union know. Identify the chemical involved. Follow the safety data sheet, first aid directions. Get medical attention as needed. Better safe than sorry. Better to send somebody to the clinic or the ER, even if you think there might be a problem, or go there yourself. Why does it say let your supervisor and union know? Well, because unions are supposed to be on the side of the employee, and guess what? So is the safety department. So they should be working closely with them. There's no problem letting your union know, but I don't know why particularly they say that, but you let your supervisor know for sure. We always said it, okay, food, let the supervisor or nurse, either one of those. That's all there is for this hazard communication. Again, we have presented this because hazard communication is such a misunderstood standard, and it's one of the most written up in OSHA, and it shouldn't be. It's not that difficult. Okay, it's a little difficult, but now that you know about it, you shouldn't have a problem in your hazard communication program. Remember, it's just that hazard communication doesn't have anything to do with spills or anything like that. It's communicating hazards and what to do with them. And that's why you need to have like PPE, and it comes into place because that's part of it. All right. That's it. You made it through these. Congratulations. Nothing's left is the final. And I got to find the keys to my new shed out back. So that's it, everybody. Be safe.